This is Sirens, a new series brought to you by the Ladies of Bombshell, where we dissect the institutions of American power. Join us as we sound the alarm on technology, governance, and national security issues, and maybe lure some men to their deaths. I'm Erin Simpson.
I'm Lauren D. Young-Schulman.
And I'm Rada Iyengar-Plum.
And we have a mini episode here today dedicated to a bit of professional development. While there are many how-to guides on job searching and applying and interviewing, we thought we'd flip the script a little bit and do a segment on how to hire. A lot of folks kind of in our part of the career ladder are now managers or have been managers for a few years. And I think that one of the best parts of being a manager is that you get to hire people. But not everyone has a great experience either as a hiring manager or as an applicant. And so we wanted to take just a minute and talk about some of the good, bad, and ugly of hiring in the broader federal and national security world. So this conversation is meant to cover really a range of hiring experiences, both large and small organizations, public and private sector. But of course, there are differences in each of those contexts, and we'll maybe have a little bit of opportunity to drill into that. But this is not going to be a segment on exactly how to work through your Pentagon hiring process or your specific nonprofit hiring effort, but instead to get us to think about some, as we said, best practices. So to get us started, Rada and Lauren, what's your favorite part of hiring? Do you have any like hiring success stories that you'd like to share?
Well, I can start, which is I will give you two examples, one in the government and one in the private sector. And I'll start with the private sector, which is when I was at a large tech company that shall remain nameless, but definitely doesn't sound like Doodle. We went through I went through a like pretty extensive hiring process to try to find a lead for a like technical role. And in that process, I think what I came to realize is how little communication there is out from the hiring organization to the candidate. So I had a great preferred candidate, and it was an slightly onerous process that involved like many rounds of interviews. And he was great and had also lots of options and was coming from a large bank. And I totally accidentally and mostly out of some combination of inexperience and exuberance took it upon myself to just like routinely check in and be like, hey, we're collating this and we're collating that. And afterwards, and he worked for me for a while, was like, it was so great to just get the feedback on the process. Not even I didn't like say, oh, this is you or not, just like we're moving to this step in the process. That was like a game changer for him, just having transparency in the steps in the process and where we were, and knowing that I was communicating. And it was a good aha moment for me on how useful the transparency piece was, and how much that helped in actually securing a pretty in-demand candidate. And the other example I'll give, which is I imported that to the Pentagon and was trying to hire someone from a consulting group. And actually given the vagaries that is the government hiring process, use that proactively to be like, look, I know this process is slow and opaque. I am working my way through it. I'm going to just touch base with you once a week at this time, and we'll talk about where we are in the process. And that way, at least you know. And if you have something that's going to drive your timeline, you'll have an opportunity to share it with me. And I do think I did that with that one candidate, but with a couple other ones, we did it as an organization. I do think that transparency on process helps drive greater ability to pull in the kind of candidates you want.
Lauren, what about you?
So for me, that's the transparency is such an important part of hiring. And I think it's maybe the thing that people forget the most. And we'll get to that in a second. For me, my favorite part of hiring, which when I was in the nonprofit sector, probably spent at least 50% of my job on, was on recruitment, hiring, talent management, was being able to talk to candidates and talk about what jointly excited us about where we were going. And that is true for senior folks who are coming into roles, or more junior folks where it's their first role out of college, because there's only so much you can get from somebody's resume. People who are coming into a role and can see themselves in it to a degree, but then also you can jointly explore the directions that you can go from it. To me, that's like the most exciting part of it, is like to come up with like new permutations you never would have imagined before, or get people's imaginations going around, here's a different way you could grow, here's a different opportunity you could explore, here's a new skill set that you could put to use in different ways. And I loved that, both as just somebody, the opportunity to be able to see how somebody's imagination comes alive in that way, but also for the ability to see, here's how candidates can see themselves existing in this organization, regardless of whether or not I am there or anyone else is there. Like, this is them kind of catching hold of this moment and the opportunity. And that's a really, really hard thing to put into a job description, but it's for something that when you actually spend time engaging with candidates, when you get to that level, it's a really, really good use of time.
I think one of my kind of favorite examples is when I was running Keras, which was a kind of consulting or analytics type firm. I worked with a woman as part of a broader team, and she lived across the country at that point in time. She worked for an entirely different company, doing something entirely different. But I was like, she is very good, and I think it would just be very interesting to get a chance to work with her. And so I told her that. I was not running the company at that point in time, but I was running one of the teams. And so at some point, another company bought the group that she was working for. She got relocated to the East Coast, and I was like, hey, love to catch back up. Let me know. When you're ready to have a conversation, I'm ready to have a conversation. And it was probably more than 2 years from that first encounter, maybe even a little bit longer, to when I brought her on board. But was one of those things where it's like when there's somebody that you want to work with, like you just personally would love to be able to work with them. Finding the way. Life is long. These career paths are convoluted or take many different paths. So getting her finally, seeing the kind of culmination of that after a few years was really great. She ended up going and starting her own business several years after that and is doing gangbusters. So I felt quite validated around that. Well, those are some good lessons and success stories. We've heard some horror stories this year. I don't know if you guys have any horror stories you want to share. We have a lot of friends on the job market. We have a lot of colleagues, who are looking at things. I think we've heard there's a lot of like endless rounds of interviews. There's a lot of, it feels like, people who don't, they want to hire somebody, but they don't have a very firm sense of what that somebody is. What are some common mistakes you guys see in the broader hiring process, whether public sector or private, big or small? What are the sorts of things that you hear about frequently and they kind of put your teeth on edge?
So sometimes there's a good reason that you have people go through multiple rounds of steps, multiple rounds of interviews. And that may be because you know that that person's success relies on them having validation and buy in from multiple levels or multiple angles of your stakeholders or so on. And the length has a reason. It's like a process where you have like a long process and you have a reason behind it. But sometimes it's because you just have no effing idea what you actually want, and you don't actually have any idea how to validate or prioritize candidates. So you end up doing, which is effectively a job trial without paying anybody, by having them go through multiple rounds of interviews, presentations, writing samples, and so many other things. And don't get me wrong, practical things are a really good, useful way to hire people. But when you're doing it such that people are spending days and days of their time, and multiple candidates are spending days and days of their time, and you're not either paying them for that or giving them feedback or otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time. It's clear to everyone at that point in time that you have absolutely no idea what's going on. So before you demand lots of an interview process, have in mind, what is this for? What is like this investment of time for everybody? Are you getting something out of it that you have no other ability to do? Or is it just because you're not actually sure what's happening and therefore you're using this in order to get vibes? If you're just getting vibes, you can do that in 5 minutes over coffee. If you're actually evaluating on somebody and trying to get buy-in, have those check boxes in your mind before you ask somebody to commit tremendous amounts of time, or better yet, pay them for it.
I I couldn't agree with that more. And I will just add on, mine is very adjacent to that, which is people have value propositions. If you are asking someone to do as part of their interview a presentation with content that you would consider corporate proprietary information that you would not allow them to share with other people, you should not be requiring them to present that to you in an interview unless you pay them or provide them IP protections. They are not responsible for giving you IP, their intellectual property on like what your engagement strategy is, what their network is and how it can value you, what their ideas for product management or product strategy is, product marketing. Those are all their intellectual property, and to use those as a judgment criteria for interviews without protection for those interviewees is just exploitative. And it's like you see this right now, especially in the tech sector. You see a lot of this because the market is hot and there's potential for real return, but also lots of layoffs. So it's very like bifurcated. And I think it's an extremely exploitative process, especially in these what I'll call softer skills on government relations, policy, communications, operations, where it's not like a coding interview where you're assessing objective skills and instead you're forcing people to give up their IP so that you can judge them and then you can steal that IP rather than hiring them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there are honest mistakes in that category, but there's a lot of truly dishonest mistakes in that category as well. I agree with both of those bits of frustration. I think I would frame a little bit differently, which is that people don't spend enough time on the position description, both in terms of understanding what gap they're actually trying to fill in an organization, and then what skills are actually required to fill that gap. And so you see, part of this is a little bit of a distinction between how you write position descriptions for the public sector, for like USA Jobs hiring versus private sector. I much prefer the private sector style, which is to make job requirements quite limited, right? The lowest number of years of experience, things that you could actually count. So that's, degree type, years of experience, and then maybe years of management or similar technical, activity. Everything else is a preferred qualification. But you just see a lot of stuff where people are like, we'd like to hire someone awesome. Are you awesome? And it's like, well, that doesn't help me as a candidate, like figure out like if that's the kind of work that I would like to do. And it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that what it is you need done. So a related bit of that is sort of unicorn hiring, which is you sometimes see these open job searches for more senior positions that just go on and on. They never close. They don't culminate. And at some point, that actually reflects back on the organization more so than it reflects on the candidates. So, to that point, what are some bits of etiquette? I think a lot of times folks, focus on, oh, I want to get the qualifications exactly right, or I want, interview, 10 different people within the organization. But are there some kind of hygiene or etiquette pieces that folks could really benefit from in terms of running a more, as we were saying before, transparent or effective hiring process?
Yeah. So I had the great privilege of working with lots and lots and lots of hiring experts when I worked in the federal government, which is a crazy hiring environment. But from that, you get a sense of like, here's how you do your absolute best within insane constraints. And so both in that environment and elsewhere, some tactics that I really appreciated were particularly for junior interviewees, sending them the questions ahead of time because there's no reason not to. Like that they're most of them are in a learning environment. If they take the role, they're going to be in a learning role, and telling them like, here's the questions I'm going to ask you. It's not a quiz. It's not a pop quiz. Just like I want to hear genuinely what your answers are. That makes it both a fair process for a lot of people, but also one where you don't get somebody who gets messed up because it's their first or second interview in their life, which is like an entirely reasonable thing to expect somebody to mess up on. Some of the other things I think that are useful in terms of etiquette are make sure you are both telling people what the phases of it are going to be and also including the relevant stakeholders they're going to work with and flagging what that is. So if you're having folks interview with the people who are going to be their peers or their bosses, tell them, but also like that's an important set of folks to have involved. If you're having folks be interview with like the human capital specialist and somebody who's adjacent and somebody who's going to judge their writing, those may be relevant, but also make sure that you're engaging them in a way that makes sense for their time and it makes sense for the interviewee's time. Engage people for the interview process who are actually going to have to work with that person or whose judgment makes sense to be a part of that conversation rather than this person had time and I'm just going to throw them into the room.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like, I think the more you can telegraph clearly both the roadmap of the interview process and then the point of each interview. So again, I'll take this from like a tech sector, tech company type, where in which you have technical interviews on your very specific skills. You have what I'll say, like how your brain works interviews, just like, are you a logical, structured thinking? And then like culture or fit interviews. I think it is not just etiquette. You do a service to you get a better fit if you can help people understand the point of each of those interviews.
Mhm.
And so the more you can say, "Hey, this is an interview where I wanna understand, like, how you code. Like, tell me how you work through this problem. This is an interview where I just wanna see you reason through the problem. I just wanna understand how your brain works. I don't care about the code. I don't care about how long it takes. Just walk me through show me your math out loud." Or this is an interview where I just wanna like, get your vibe. Like, are you part of the thing here or not? That really helps the candidate be their best self in real life, but also lets you judge them on the actual things you wanna judge them on in that setting. And so I think there's just a Pareto improving outcome by being transparent about that.
I think there's some basic etiquette, that, like literal etiquette in terms of acknowledging, receipt of applications,
Yep.
acknowledging when people have not moved through to an interview, to the next round, whether that's feedback to an interviewee or feedback to candidates who are not interviewees. And there's some, room for maneuver here. You may not, I for one do not like to, provide full updates to all the interviewees until my preferred candidate has accepted or not. Because then you actually may need to go back to that interviewee if they don't accept the offer. But I do think that, to our initial point about, feedback, there's feedback to a lot of people who are not kind of your main, point of contact. And in a lot of organizations that falls to human resources or talent acquisition or business ops, which is a little bit different than if you're in a smaller organization and you yourself or your staff have to do that. But I think that that's a good activity. When I ran a small business, we would you block a couple hours and you reply back to everyone who's doing the thing. Um, that
And now
way,
you
again.
have like their Workday and everything else, those interfaces that like you let you do have. Yes, they're templates, but there's pretty nice interfaces that allow you to actually reply back. They're not challenging. They take you
Right.
2 checks of the box to be able to do so. And the number of places that don't actually do it are astonishing.
And I think
The
everyone keeps in their head, like, "Oh, yeah, I applied for that, but never heard anything," you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say the thing number one thing I think you should not it should not be that you went past if you had any interviews for a job, like, that is past the resume screening stage, you shouldn't find out that job was hired for without ever hearing something back.
Like on
I'm not saying it
LinkedIn?
needs to be yeah, I'm not saying it needs to be deep feedback, but I am saying, like, someone needs to say, "Hey, we've moved on. We're going in a different direction," whatever the euphemism is, like, just a basic courtesy
Yeah.
there.
And also because,
It's
like,
like
these
ghosting.
are
It's the
these are
interview
right,
ghosting.
it is interview ghosting, and it's as we were saying before, it's just a small town. The chances that you're gonna be, working with that person as colleagues, as that they're gonna be hiring you, on the next turn of the wheel, like, I just think that there's no reason not to, sort of pursue that sort of thing.
One last piece of etiquette I'll throw in that's related to this timing piece is so like interviewing takes a lot of time for the HR team and for the folks who are involved in the hiring process. Make sure people have blocked the time, they're taking it seriously, and they're making enough time to not spring last second interviews on possible candidates or giving them enough space to be able to fit it into their lives. So people who are interviewing, they may have other jobs, they may have other life commitments. Yes, there should be prioritizing this in some way, but it's also you can't drop your entire life in order to fit in a sudden last minute interview that's going to take your entire day the next day. That's an entirely unreasonable thing for any job to want you to do. And if they want a candidate who can do that, they're picking the wrong kind of candidate.
So we've talked about some kind of specific examples of good practices or etiquette, all of which I think kind of contribute to what a good hiring process would look like, either in government or the private sector. Want to just kind of key in on a couple of maybe narrower questions. what are some of the differences against hiring against an established role, whether you've got formal billets, or you need an engineer of a certain, age or year grade versus a more strategic hire where you are really trying to, maybe you're trying to create a role for someone, or maybe you have an opportunity, it's the end of an administration, a lot of talent's going to be on the market, so there's opportunities to bring some new folks in. What are some of the differences in hiring again for that specific existing role versus something a little bit more ephemeral?
I think on this strategic role, there's a lot of it depends that goes with it, but to me, it's the sort of thing where, to your point, Aaron, like it's if you have that can take a long time. That could be I'm gonna start this conversation with you. Neither of us know exactly how it's gonna end. And we should be willing to transparently brainstorm with one another. And that takes a lot on the part of the interviewer to be able to show that like I'm gonna put stuff on the table. I don't know if it's gonna make sense. But I want us both to be willing to say, like, yes, that could make sense. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Here's like not only just like titles and salary and things like that, but roles and opportunities. So that the person who's interviewing can see that like you're willing to put investment into them. Like this should be you can't do this with 30 people. It should be a few folks that you're interested in, you think can make a huge difference. If you can't bring them in, it's okay. But if you can bring them in, they should be an absolute game changer of a hire. Versus a more technical hire, like that should be what the process is going to be, what the expectations are going to be, and you can predict that moment to moment. Whereas like the more strategic hire can be, I'm willing to take some time on this and expend some energy and risk on it that may not actually come to fruition, because if it does, it's going to be worth both of our time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the upside of a established role, and I even had some of this when I was in government too. I was getting to build a new team, but some of them were, for existing roles. And so if it's an existing role, hopefully somewhere there's an existing position description, although that's often a fun journey of discovery depending on where you're working. Whereas for a strategic hire, it's much more of a kind of open canvas of what could we be doing differently? Like what
Mhm.
team would I like to build that I don't have right now?
Yep.
And could this, senior person, kind of be the beachhead? What talent could they bring, along with them? But it is a much more it's a courtship
Yep.
as opposed to a selection process, I guess I would say. Rada, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think there are a couple of different pieces, and Aaron, you hit on some of this. One is like there is just a world in which you can feel the need for something. Just feel it in your bones. You feel it in your fingers. You feel it in your toes.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I'll leave that there. But and so though for those kind of strategic hires, you are hiring for that kind of come give me a like form follows function kind of way to solve this hole that I am need to like address this gap in my ecosystem. And there are other roles that are much more I need these skills. Like I am missing this thing and I have these 7 things and I have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I need a 3.
Mhm.
And one is I don't think companies are always clear on when they want a 3 and they're pretending it's a strategic hire,
Right.
right? And there isn't a form follows function. There is a function and you need to follow it. And but also I think the reality that is how free are you in those strategic hires to really allow that evolution? And I'll just note, you know, you see this right now a little bit in the tech sector on these like totally batshit like
The crazy AI
hires that are happening,
hires. Yeah.
crazy AI hires. But like that is like a kind of extreme version of this, which is there's like a peg out there. And we don't know exactly what it is, but there is a something, a je ne sais quoi about people that we think can help get us there, and we're just willing to pay for it. And if that's where you are in your hiring, I think you got to be a lot more transparent about it because you're hiring for a very particular thing than the function, and mixing those two up, you're just not going to get the right people in either bucket.
The other thing I'd say is that sometimes when you think you need to do a strategic hire, actually what you need to do is gently encourage other people to leave. Like
Yeah.
you're
I
not
totally agree.
yeah, you're not actually trying to bring in new talent. It's that you are annoyed with, bored of, not satisfied with, for whatever reason, the existing talent, or they're not getting along, and fix that problem.
You
Bringing
know
in a
what it
new
is?
person.
It's having a baby to fix a marriage.
Yes, it's 100% that.
It's not gonna fix it.
I think these are great insights. Obviously, people should let us do all the hiring. I think we would do a really good job, and I would certainly argue that we do a better job than a lot of what we're seeing out in the ecosystem. Any last kind of hiring hacks or pro tips for either maybe a first time hiring manager, or some folks who are they're inundated by maybe a lot of candidates, a lot of quality people who need a job, but they don't fit the bill for anything that they have on offer. Anything last bits of wisdom we want to share here?
I think that the thing I've taken from being a hiring manager to various levels is it's okay to be human in the process. And by that, I mean, like, there are going to be people you see that aren't the right fit for it, and you still like them as people and you want to connect with them and respond to them. There are going to be times when there are people who aren't right and you need to break hard news for them, and that's hard for you and hard for them. And I think if we can let a little more humanity into the process, I actually think that would help us all, candidates and hiring managers alike.
Um, Mine is much more boring than that. That's a great answer, and I completely agree with it. The thing I would add are as you're thinking about interviewing, scenario interviewing is just like it's a big thing these days, and it tends to be so backward looking. So it's when we asked about this question on LinkedIn, somebody made a point which I could not be more behind or more endorsing of, which is when you're doing scenario interviewing, talk about what would you do in a future scenario, not what did you do previously, because we want people to be learning creatures. Just because somebody messed up on something doesn't mean that they like did not grow from it in some way. You like have so kind of pairing two questions. One of what would you do in a particular scenario in the future? But then also talk to me about a time where you messed up and what you learned from it and how you're acting differently now. I've asked that question in almost any interview I've ever done, and there's been a few folks who could not answer it at all. And I didn't hire, not only did I not hire them, we talked about them for like 20 minutes after of like, wow, that person couldn't come up with the time they'd messed up. That's crazy. So like that, those are both really, really great indicators of somebody's ability to do the work that you want. What they did previously, it's helpful, but you can get that from their resume.
I think my answer to this would be, building off of both of those fantastic responses is, hiring actually takes a lot of work and intentionality, right? So you need to think about how much effort the candidates are putting in. You as a hiring manager, and even on the interview panel, if you do a panel set of interviews, need to put in a roughly commensurate amount of, time, or at least again, dedication and intention. What does your team need? How are you going to find that talent? We even talked about sourcing, or how you try to actually get good candidates, in front of you, diverse pools, and all of the important things that we have to actually get quality talent into these large organizations, especially. But it takes time. It's not just that you post a job announcement, and then the unicorns come stampeding in. So think about what you really need. Think about the kinds of skills that actually will fill that, the actual requirements, and then spend the time, curating that pool, reading those resumes, and really getting to know the people who've applied for that position. So, um, I think with that, we will end there. Thank you, ladies. Happy hiring, happy applying. We'll talk to you all soon.